What was once one turned into three. Reconnecting with our family. A safe space to speak authentically. We raise our cups, unifying as three. We bring freedom in community. Random thoughts and golden nugget treats. Welcome, Three of Cups community. Let's go ahead and raise the frequency.
What is up, y'all? We are back for part 2 of the topic of me coming out of a victimized mindset. So let me start off by heading to the next topic we were touching on. I was just finishing up in my last video talking about how, I've had instances, where my verbiage is not the cleanest when I reach a point of annoyance or frustration that results in me obviously using colorful language. And that is not only just a part of my story, but it is still a part of my personality when I reach those points. And these days I'm not as bad as what I used to be. I will admit that. But I do own that those are still parts of me. And I know that not a lot of people are a fan of folks using colorful language when they want to express themselves, and that's okay. I'm just not going to be the type to adjust myself when someone complains. I adjust myself when I want to instead of when somebody is telling me to just direct my speech in a different direction. I decide when I want to do that, and that's kind of like something that I just ended up falling into, because I'd be changing my speech for someone else more before I decide that I'm ready to do it for myself, and that's why when I've reached those points, I've had to have grace with myself. Yes, there was a time where, actually a few times, where I did apologize, and I could have approached it better after the fact, of course, but obviously I don't talk to those people anymore. Because normally if there's a situation where you reach that point, I mean, it's very rare to mend that when you burn that bridge, because there's also a matter of sustaining respect within the connections as well. And so if I've lost respect for you at that point, if I've reached that point where I do not have respect anymore for respecting you out of the amount of disrespect I feel coming from you, there's like a choice that I'm usually pretty good now at being aware of, but back then there's usually a choice of me just jumping straight into that boat and not giving it a second thought. But I've gotten better. Thank you very much. Anyways, next topic here we're going to talk about is basically me entering into connections where I was always under this mindset that if I treated people the way I would want to be treated, then they would show up for me the way I show up for them. That was probably the most common mindset I used to always use whenever I entered a connection. And it screwed me a lot every time. And the outcome was always different. The situations were always different, but the outcomes remained the same. The outcomes that remained the same were always the lesson. The lesson I finally learned when I went through it enough times is don't expect people to do for you what you have done for them, because then that's an expectation you're putting onto the relationship when you're still learning about the character of the person you're in a connection with. If you're going to do that, you're, in a sense, setting up yourself to not only be let down, but you're not giving yourself time to see the person in front of you for who they are as a person. And I don't say that in a negative light, but more of in a light of give yourself time to learn about the person in front of you as they are, outside the expectations you already have for the standards and values you carry within yourself. Over time, you will learn if the character of the person in front of you aligns with who you are. And this doesn't mean that I'm saying that a person has to be exactly the same as you. This doesn't mean as well that I'm saying a person has to meet all the check marks, because we're human. I'm saying that it's about learning what are you willing to accept about a person while you're consciously aware that there is visible improvement being made on both sides, because this includes you as well, aka it included me. Back to the example. Is there visible proof of regular work being done on an internal level where it's clear the person is working on themselves regularly, to where you know you are able to handle the moments that their shadow comes to surface, handling the moments when their bad habits reveal themselves or come to surface? Are you capable of holding then the space that they need? Are you capable of holding the space that requires their growth? And this doesn't mean you parenting them. I'm talking like, are you able to give them that space to, yes, hold them accountable, but to let them look at themselves without you pointing the finger too much? Yeah, lay out what you don't appreciate, lay out what you don't like, but they're already harshly judging themselves enough without actually verbally probably saying it out loud themselves. And if you're already aware that they are very self-aware, that's already a green flag. That's a green flag. If they're self-aware, that's a green flag, because then you get to visually see, since you're self-aware, are you accountable enough to stay aware and practice regularly the redevelopment of this part of self, so that it is being worked on and not ignored to where you're just expecting someone to just accept, to receive the treatment of that habit regularly, because that's a red flag. That is how you tell the difference when you are in observer mode and determining if someone is in alignment with the values you hold and the standards you have. And sometimes it's not about how many good times you have, how many laughs you have, how many things you have in common, the commonalities of the pursuits that you guys have together. Sometimes it comes down to how responsible is this person to parent themselves when it's time for them to be accountable, and how responsible is this person to be self-aware themselves when it's their turn to hold a safe space for you? Those are key things because it goes both ways. I know I mentioned earlier about you holding a safe space, but also they would be in the same boat. Are they willing to hold a safe space? And when I say holding a safe space, I don't mean listening to someone going through their shit, talking their feelings and spilling out the beans, and then you go on and you go and talk to somebody to get some advice when that's none of your business to speak on. That's none of your business to, that's not your story to tell. That's their story. And they confided into the safe space you provided. So if you know you have a habit of allowing someone to sit in your safe space to just be while they feel, and then you take that opportunity to then speak on it with someone that wasn't even a part of that moment, that's a red flag. That's a really big red flag. That's like a violation. That's my violation, at least. And the thing is the reason I'm going through this example is because this is just one of many scenarios or situations I've been in where it's about me trusting the wrong people, me trusting in the fact that people will do the right thing when you're in those vulnerable moments. And it was clear I lacked the self-awareness to recognize that I was confiding in people that had no respect for my value, my presence, or the sacred space that we shared when we went through these moments. And that's my fault. That's my fault, because as much as I was still learning about my own values and standards for what I'm looking for in connections, I put myself there. I could say all day, oh no, see, they should have known better. Oh no, see, they're human just like me. How would they like, I could go into that, and I have before many times, and it's gotten me nowhere. Guess where it got me? Stuck in that moment in time. Stuck in that moment in time because I didn't hold myself accountable. The accountability is key for every situation that you run into where you come out complaining about the actions of another person while you were presently there during the action committed. Where can you take accountability in situations that you interacted with, even if it was clear the other party clearly violated your privacy, your personal boundaries? If they're in a space where they're comfortable enough to do that, it means that they've done it before, and you've either overlooked it or ignored it. I have. Many times. Because I operate from this mindset of, I'm actually coming slowly out of it, but I'm still in it. Where when I see behavior that is obviously a red flag, I learn to accept that that's a part of that person in that moment. And I learn that this is just a moment. This is not them. And because I still am in this mindset of looking at things this way, it puts me in a position to constantly give chances when I address what's observed. And that puts me in a position to constantly overlook red flags because of how much grace I have given and always give when I am interacting with people, working on self-identifying, self-awareness with these red flags. And when I say working with people, I'm talking about people I was in connections with, and people I am in connections with. The difference between back then and now is because I am holding myself more accountable. I have started to learn the difference between acquaintance, friends, and soul connections, and that the categories do have lines in my perspective. There's acquaintances that you get along with, that you happen to see, you shared some good times together, but you really don't connect like that, but you guys are on good terms. Barely speak, but when you see each other, and that's about it. Friends, I've learned that there's a 50% chance you're either going to be really close and chill and you're always checking up on one another, or it's like a long distant connection. And depending on what it is, depends on the direction of where that connection takes you. Then you got the soul connections. In my eyes, are the people that are self-aware, to know that constant improvement is always going to be a necessity when you are interacting with anybody, including themselves, when there's something identified by the person who's in a connection with them for them to look at. And these soul connections know to share the space with the other party, to not be argumentative or defensive, but to be open and raw and vulnerable, and to choose to seek to understand one another more than judge one another, and using the space to, and not using the space to judge, but to see the space as a sacred area, and they honor it through privacy and respect. And they still choose to accept the person as they are while they continue to grow together. Where it's an ever-evolving connection. It's an ever-evolving type of space that they share with each other, because they understand that they both may be on their own separate journeys, but they understand that there will be moments where there's going to be growing pains, and depending on how each person shows up for each other during those moments will basically show and determine, is this person like gonna still see me for me once they're also observing that, like, you're going out of your way to work on yourself at the same time, and you're not hesitant to do so. You're not going to avoid it. You're not going to run from it. You're not going to evade or avoid it or get defensive or victimize yourself. You're just going to own it. You're going to own it. You're going to sit with it, and you're going to deconstruct it and analyze it and choose to be better in those moments. And these are my perspectives of how I view this, because the soul connections are rare. Acquaintances and friendships are anywhere, but soul connections are rare in my eyes. And there will be people that will act like they can operate in a soul connection energy. But this goes back to my statement of, in my eyes, the person has to align. The person has to align first. Because depending on where you are on your journey will depend on the alignment of the soul connection you're aligned with for that moment in time on your journey. If you just start to create soul connections just randomly, like friendships or acquaintances, to me, it's like you're missing the point of the sacredness of that circle. It's exclusive. To me, it's like exclusive. That's that tight circle. Those are like the roots at the bottom of a tree, that when they're there, they're not going anywhere. That's the foundation of a tree. That tree's not going anywhere because those roots are staying there. They're both growing together. As the roots are growing, the tree is still growing. As the roots are getting older, the tree is also growing older. So, yeah, approaching connections where I used to be in the mindset of treat others how you want to be treated, definitely now looking through all my experiences, definitely not the advice I would give someone. I think it's probably the worst advice I could give someone. Probably the worst advice. And y'all can do what you want, but I want to recommend this mindset when you enter in connections. I wouldn't. Unless you want to go through the same cycles. And who knows, maybe you won't go through the same cycles. Maybe you'll go through something completely different. I've learned too that when you're aligned with other connections, the lessons may align, but the experiences will be different for everyone. So even if my experiences may not align with you, but the lesson still appears as the same, that actually is a thing. It's something I also learned. So when someone shares advice, like I have also shared advice when I've been approached with someone venting to me about a situation or a circumstance, I've learned that sometimes the advice given may not be what that person actually needs, because it may not align with their journey the way that it aligned for you. But there's variables within the advice that are supposed to resonate for that individual, because that individual is sharing their journey with you. You're not in it. So when you give advice, when I give advice, I now keep practicing the mindset where I'm making sure I'm not projecting the advice into the expectation of acceptance, but providing it through the idea that I'm leaving this here and you can take what you need from it, and then basically best of luck to the rest of what you figure out, because there's not a lot to really give answers for, because everyone's a reflection of their own journey. And for me, I've gotten so used to projecting the advice that I just expected people to take the advice I gave. And that's when I learned later on that I may have good advice, but I was using it incorrectly. This also goes for giving answers to people that need to figure out the answers themselves. I also was guilty of doing that. And I would then feel unappreciated if people didn't take the advice I was providing, because it's like, damn, I just spent all this time explaining examples, experiences, and ideas of things, and now I'm feeling like people are ungrateful. Well, that's another victimized mindset I put myself in because of the expectation I was projecting onto people when providing them advice. And that was another thing I had to come out of. That one was not easy either. And it was not easy to see that. But I finally saw it when somebody I was talking to brought up to me how the advice I gave helped, but it didn't completely complete what they needed to figure out for them. And that's when everything started to connect. And then when I sat with myself, that's when I started to connect all the dots, and it was like, oh, so I can only provide to a certain point when it comes to answers, but still leave a breadcrumb trail for them to be able to follow, for them to figure out their own answer, because the answers I provide may not always be the answer they actually need. But there'll be breadcrumbs so that they can lead them to the answer they're needing to seek. That was a big deal. That was big. When it came to being in a space of feeling embarrassed or ashamed whenever I had reactive behaviors to situations or circumstances that upset me, I would be embarrassed or ashamed after the fact, because my reactive behavior to whatever occurred that brought me there was clearly connected to me only knowing how to react to that situation in that moment, based off of course, the only thing I know how to react to in that moment, because I haven't worked on building that part of myself yet, working on that part of myself yet. And so I've looked cuckoo to people when I was younger. I'd be crying, physically shaking, and yelling all at the same time because I couldn't regulate my emotions. At the time, I didn't know what the heck was wrong with me and why I couldn't be able to express myself the way I wanted to. All I could do was physically shake, cry, and be reactive with what I would say verbally. I recall there were times I'd even like throw stuff or punch a pillow. Hell, like I've had moments where I've even like gotten physical with others, and it was all out of being in a space where I couldn't regulate what I needed to say. All I could do was act. And going through that space and revisiting it, since I started my journey of self-awareness and accountability, it was like looking back at it after now learning how to regulate everything. It's like, I had some apologies to make. I had some people I needed to apologize to, and I had some self-forgiveness practices I needed to apply for myself, and some grace I needed to give to myself, because I was so I felt so ashamed and embarrassed that I was then needing to figure out how to regulate those emotions. And at the time, the only way I regulated those emotions was through criticizing myself and making myself feel so small. Because I know now that it could have been approached differently. And I was too blinded back then to see it. The repercussions of each action I did, or each reactive behavior I acted on, or the way I responded where there was no emotional regulation, there was heavy judgment, obviously, from others as well, which contributed to me critiquing myself so much to make myself feel super small, but like it didn't solve anything. It didn't resolve anything. If anything, I was putting myself in a space to beat myself up internally so much that I wasn't helping myself grow at all. I was belittling myself to the point where I wasn't making progress on my personal growth at all. I was just constantly judging myself because that's all I could do. That's all I could do in those moments, because that's all I knew how to do, was to just judge, criticize, and critique myself. Oh, this was bad. Oh, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, see, you fucked up there. That's basically like, I can't tell you how many times I curled up and just scrunched my eyes like, damn. Yeah. Oh man, the curled up blanket, head in a pillow. Oh yeah, those were tough times to process things that when I was reflecting on my behavior and my choices. Obviously, I'm not like that anymore. I've realized that in order to come out of this mindset, I needed to stop verbally treating myself like shit for behavior that, yeah, was wrong, but I needed to start to show up for myself and be the safe space I needed for myself in order for me to give myself the opportunity for my growth. Because I was waiting for somebody else to do that for me. I was waiting for somebody else to accept me still in those moments. because I was having trouble accepting me. And of course, if I'm having trouble accepting me, why the hell am I going to think somebody else is going to accept me? That's backwards. I didn't know that at the time, that I was waiting for somebody to accept me, though, and I didn't know that back then I was waiting for me to accept me first. Honestly, when I started the process of self-acceptance, it was baby steps. It wasn't big strides. If anything, it was like I had to meditate first, regularly, just meditating, before I could even start getting to the roots of things. And when I first started meditating, I had no idea what I was doing. It actually was really crazy how it happened. I was wanting to shed some weight, and so I started a program that included meditation, and never did meditation before. And after 6 months of meditation, I didn't know I activated. I didn't know that I was activating my intuition. I didn't know that I was activating my energetic field where I would be able to receive messages more clearly, to be clear. And I say that because there was a day within the near ending of the 6-month period of where I was regularly meditating, and I was doing it daily. My clairaudient ability kicked in, and it caught me off guard so much that I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what the heck just happened, but I was receiving messages not from like my spirit team or my ancestors. At the time, I didn't even know about those things. I didn't even know the existence of them at the time. I was still just in the space of meditating. Okay, like that's where I was. Baby steps, snail race. That's where I was, and the voice I heard and felt was me. I was speaking to me, and they were not nice words. They were very cruel words that I didn't expect to hear. And that is kind of when I started the journey that I didn't know I started. I didn't know I started it, by the way, because I was in a very strict home where spirituality was not allowed, not a thing. Very, very much not allowed. And so I got freaked out. I got freaked out, and I was thinking to myself, like, why does that voice sound like me? Why does that voice sound like me? I was spiraling a little bit in that moment. I was like, why did I just say that to myself? Like, what's going on? Like, why is it being said to me? Like, and why do I feel like I believe what they're saying? Like, that was like the cracking of the egg before the egg was like fully open. Like, the cracks were beginning to form on the egg, where things were starting to be seeped out just a little bit. And I went into a victimized mindset in that moment because I was having trouble trying to not believe what I got told to me when my first ability kicked in. Mind you, I don't remember all the things that were said to me because I think I made peace with it. So it's like and it was also, I forgot how long ago it was. I think it was definitely within, no, I forgot actually. But I was scared too. I was scared too because it was like, how could I be so mean to myself? And that voice sounded like me. Oh, and I didn't really connect until later on that I believed those things about myself. And so those were things that on a subconscious level I was saying to myself, not realizing that those are things I believed about myself. And this was another connection to the victimized mindset of, if I believe those things about myself, woe is me, well now what? Because how do I get myself out of a mindset where I'm convinced that this is who I am and that I can't change, and this is just, I'm being, I'm in a space where this inner version of me is trying to convince me that this is who I am and I'm supposed to just stay this way and not change. And it was, I think, my very first internal battle with self. And I didn't even know I entered one. I didn't know I entered one, bro. It was crazy. Crazy. When I asked my first therapist about it, yeah, I said first. I've went through a couple. Because, life happens. When you know you gotta go, you gotta go. Anyways. She made it very clear that if something like that showed up, the only thing that would make sense is if someone has said it to you and you believed it. I couldn't recall anyone, really, that would have said the stuff that I heard in my mind. Okay? When you're clairaudient and you're getting those messages, I could not recall. I couldn't. Which means I must have said it to myself at some point in my life, because I felt that way about myself. And if I felt that way about myself, that means that I allowed myself to drown in the idea of believing projections that were projected onto me by others because I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I just came up with my own conclusions about me, so that when people that I experienced who bullied me or would intentionally target me, it wouldn't be as bad as half the shit I've said to myself or that I believed about myself. And granted, it still hurt when it was said to me, but this was another part of the victimized mindset that I held within myself. And that was not easy to get out of. That was a rabbit hole that probably took me a while. It took me a while. And for those of you who aren't aware of clairaudient abilities, just Google it. Because I'm not a full-on expert of clairaudience. For me, clairaudient, it goes in and out for me. But I know it's active. That's for sure. But spirit picks and chooses when I hear, when I'm supposed to hear something. That's just one of the abilities that I know I have. I'm not going to talk about them, obviously, but I bring up to look up clairaudient abilities because I think that if you activated your gifts and you went through something similar, you may not have known you activated your gifts, and it may have caught you off guard, and it freaked you the fuck out. It freaked you out. So, just know that if you went through something similar, it's a process, it's a transition. It's a transition, a process to where you're now beginning the journey of exploring your psyche, your unconscious, your inner you, the version of you of who you are in that moment that you're going to decide if you're ready to grow from or stay in, depending on where you're at in your journey. I think the biggest thing that helped me out of this version of self that tried to convince me to stay who I was affirmations that I began to work on speaking. Not a lot of them. I started, I believe, with a few of them, if I recall. If anything, I also, there's power when you speak on something that scared you, that freaked you out, that intimidated you. There's power in venting about your personal experience with a safe space. I didn't have that entirely where I should have. If anything, I had to find my safe space, and I did. I did. Now, I'm not saying, every therapist is going to be open-minded, so be mindful of that. I'm more as of saying my safe space was more as of, I kind of eventually opened up to my partner at the time, who's now my husband, but like basically he was non-judgmental, very open to listening, and like he wasn't reactive, but more as of just, he allowed me to speak. And that's the kind of thing you would want for your space, is where you can find someone that will let you speak when you, and if you are in those moments where your inner version of you, that version that you're ready to outgrow, is trying to keep you where you are by trying to convince you of who you are versus who you no longer are choosing to be, if that makes sense. As I'm speaking on this gives me this feeling, this sense of like, now that I'm looking at it, it's giving me this sense of like, this was my first experience of going through a death and rebirth with myself, my personality, my traits and habits. And my very first one of these, which includes the experience I just explained as just an example, when I got over feeling sorry for myself, for how I spoke to myself within myself, when I got over myself, I realized that I'm the one in charge, and I need to figure out how to reconstruct this mindset, because I put myself here, and now I need to get myself out of it by taking charge of myself, not waiting for somebody to come save me and tell me what to do. I had to figure out what best fits with me. And at the time, I wasn't even fully aware, like I said, of ancestors, angels, spirit team. I was not aware of that, or those beings at the time. I had myself, and the one person that was listening to me, and my courage to still get through.
Freedom in community, random thoughts and golden nugget treats. Welcome three.
So this part we're going to talk about me discovering I was double standard a lot. Here and there I still am, but it's not as bad. These times, now that I'm double standard these days, it's very like minimal, very small. It's like looking at it now and looking at back then, I'm just like, wow, I'm really glad I shifted. So when it came to me being in connections with people, I used to be someone that when someone would share with me something that they needed to talk to me about, right? I used to be someone that judged them. I used to be someone that pointed the finger and be like, how could you do that? Why would you do that? What's the logic? Why would you even think this would make any sense? Like, I would go into interrogation mode for understanding the reasons behind a person's decisions and choices, basically to the point to where it would make someone feel they couldn't even talk to me without feeling like their parent was talking to them. Like, that is what I used to show up as in connections. And yet, at the same time, I wasn't aware of how I was doing the specific thing I didn't want someone to do to me. But I wasn't aware of it until I sat with myself, because I don't think I really was open-minded enough when I got feedback from people like, oh, you judge a lot. Like, I never really fully processed it. I just took it personal. Victimizing. I definitely am acknowledging that. I took it personal when someone confronted me. I took it so personal that I would create an argument with them because I wasn't open-minded enough to look at myself at the time. And I used to see it as being an insult because I thought that what I was doing at the time was helping. It wasn't helping, but I believed it was helping. Yeah. I believed it was helping. I was clearly wrong. I wasn't ready to even see I was wrong. I was too busy hanging on to the idea I was right. I was so busy hanging on to that idea I was right. That was my ego. That was my ego. That was my survival of the fittest in that moment. Like, oh, I gotta prove the facts on why this is the correct way I am to approach this so that it gets a person thinking about their decisions before they make them. Like, no, that was obviously me trying to find a way to not look at myself. And at the time, I saw it as me defending myself. I saw it as me standing up for myself. Because naturally, when you're used to something, and you're used to doing something that you know has helped you or benefited others you have helped through using this approach, you think that it's actually a good practice. Or you're just meeting people who are used to this mindset, and now you're reaching people who aren't used to this mindset, who are telling you about yourself, aka people telling me about myself, and you're just not ready to hear it. And so you're going to keep having it thrown in your face until you listen. That's what happened to me. It kept being thrown in my face until I listened. I then was trying to figure out, because I started running into instances where people were keeping things from me. They weren't telling me things, like they weren't feeling safe enough to talk to me. Well, I understand why. Back then I didn't. I took that personal too. It's like, how dare you? Like, I'm always here for you. Why are you doing that? And another victimized mindset of taking it personal that someone's choosing to remove themselves is so that they don't feel judged by the person that they want to confide and talk to. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense why you'd want to remove yourself, but back then I didn't see it that way. I didn't see it that way. And if anything, the only time I think I stepped out of my own way with this, when like, I think this was like the moment where like I finally began to shift. This was not quick. This was years of being like this. If I recall, I met somebody I worked with, and there was just a moment where something happened where I was then being treated the way that I was treating others. And I think that was actually karma starting to show up for me, where I was then, because I was being so hard-headed and I wasn't looking at myself, because I didn't know I was supposed to look at myself, because I was too busy trying to defend myself. I was too busy trying to defend my own mindset that didn't seem illogical at the time. And it seemed normal at the time. That the only way for me to learn was for me to get put through karmic lessons surrounding what I have been doing to others, for it to now be done unto me, so I can begin to understand what these people are experiencing from me. I didn't understand right away what was happening. So you can only imagine how many lessons I went through before I finally looked at myself. And even when I looked at myself, I still didn't want to believe it at the time. I was just like, no, is this what I do? And there'd be like different seeds dropped, like, yeah, and I'm like, no, I don't do that. That's horrible. No, see, that took a while for me. Because obviously I have a big ego. So with that being said, there was a lot of ego to address. There was a lot of ego to address with this situation, and I had a pretty big one. Still have a big ego, but now it's in a lot more tamed state, obviously, because I'm here now. So, with that being said, the way I got out of this whole double standard mindset was I had to first recognize that I'm the problem. And I couldn't recognize I was the problem until I was being put through karmic lessons that resembled the behavior and actions I was doing onto others. And then the question is where did I decide that this was a belief and actionable trait I should carry into my other connections? It wasn't until probably a short number of years ago that I started to look at this part of myself. Yeah. A short number of years. It wasn't a long time ago. This was a short number of years ago where I finally started to see it, because I was becoming more open-minded to where I'm the problem and where I had to look at myself. And it's scary. It's not easy. It's not easy to own things, especially when you're constantly in an environment where you're so used to fingers being pointed at you that the last thing you want to do is point fingers at yourself, to look at yourself for why is it that you're in these positions or predicaments when maybe you're actually being shown something that's a reflection of yourself that it's time for you to look at. Yeah, that's not something I wanted to look at. That's not something I was ready to look at. It took a long time for me to get ready to look at that. And I admit that. So yeah, there's still things I'm still double standard about today, but it's not as severe as what it was. It's hella better, actually. Hella better. But I'm not gonna deny that part of my journey because it is a part of my story. And that version of me is still a part of me. And so she's gonna stay right here with me. Obviously, being self-aware of her, of course, because she's a part of me. I'm not gonna reject these parts of me that are connected to a victimized mindset I worked my way out of. These are still parts of me. And to fully accept myself is to fully accept those versions of me as well, where I'm not ashamed of them, but I accept that those are versions of myself or who I used to be and who I choose to not operate from. But I choose to be aware that they are part of my story. And that was also the beginning of me learning how to not only have grace of myself in this area, but learning the true meaning of self-acceptance and beginning that journey. Because you can't expect anyone to accept versions of you that may trigger them. You can't. Even if they don't trigger them, you can't expect others to accept you. You gotta accept you. You gotta accept those sides of you. It's up to the other individuals if they choose to accept you. It's up to them. It's not for you to project onto them the expectation of acceptance. Something I've also been guilty of. Maybe somebody doesn't want to accept you. Maybe somebody doesn't want to accept me. Okay. I guess that's the end of the rope with that one. But the point I'm making with this is just because you're now practicing your own form of self-acceptance doesn't mean you can expect other people to just start accepting you in those parts of you. You are your own safe space. You have to leave it up to others around you to choose if they're willing to still accept you as you are or not. You have to leave it up to others to accept you for who you also used to be, but know that you no longer are not. And that they won't hold it against you or try to use it against you. But that they know it's a part of you and it's a part of your story, and that they respect and honor that part of you without using it as a weapon against you. This thing I'm explaining here with this isn't me saying free range to go and treat someone like shit and be yourself to the point it's so toxic that it's traumatizing someone else. I'm not saying that. I am genuinely stating through just my point of view that if a person is choosing to go out of their way to still accept you as you are, and accept that those are parts of you and parts of who you used to be, and they're not going to hold that against you or use that as a weapon against you to try to make you feel less than you are, if they're not going to do any of that to you, that's a soul connection to me. because they accept you. They accept you're still growing. They accept you're still evolving. And they also accept that you aren't perfect. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to react. You are going to have those moments in time that you're going to look back and be like, damn, I acted like this. I did this. Or I said this. I operated in this mindset. My ego was huge over here. And they're not going to weaponize it against you. They're just going to say, okay. They're going to listen. But they're not going to make you feel like shit. They're not going to make you feel less than. They're not going to go talk to the next person in line in a third-party situation and gossip like the sun isn't coming up. They're not going to do that to you. Those are soul connections. People that aren't soul connections, there's a 50% chance you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get. Okay? I don't even need to touch on the acquaintances part. I don't need to touch on that because I will let y'all put that together yourself. This is, once again, my opinion. Okay. Next topic. I always had a suspicion that there was always an angle people tried to carry out with me because I was always paranoid that people tried to take advantage of me because I was always being taken advantage of, but it's because I allowed people to take advantage of me because I didn't know how to set healthy boundaries. I was scared of setting boundaries, honestly. I was scared and nervous because I was a people pleaser. It took a while for me to come out of being a people pleaser. I'm not saying that I'm completely recovered, but I am saying that I am damn near confident that I am not the people pleaser I used to be years ago, and that I know how to lay down a boundary. But these days it's more of learning to lay a boundary down with compassion instead of sounding like an asshole. or being aggressive about it, because I've been guilty of this. But going back to the being suspicious, there was always an angle. This was another part of my victimized mindset I had to come out of, because if I'm constantly paranoid that people have an angle, then I'm talking to wrong people. If I'm constantly paranoid that there's some deceit going on, I'm talking to the wrong people. That's on me. That means that I don't have the social skills quite yet to identify who I am supposed to be around and who I'm not supposed to be around. And if I can't trust the people that I'm talking to, that I spend my time with, that's on me too. That's on me too. Because if I'm paranoid about someone having an angle when it comes to whatever they choose to do, then what kind of standards do I have for the people that I welcome into my life? Also, am I projecting something onto the connection where I might be acting as if I was having an angle? Because I used to be a manipulator. I used to be someone that constantly would twist and turn things into what I wanted when I didn't like the direction something was going, where I would use statements to confuse and turn the situation into my favor, which I have been guilty of doing because my ego was so fragile at the time that I honestly couldn't handle feeling like I lost in a conversation when I wanted to feel like I was right. So it was a mix of both. I also believe it's rooted from trust issues, where that was a thing too. But I believe it reflected a lot more of the lack of foundation of trust that I had in my connections that I had probably not built a solid foundation with, and I just jumped in the connection not knowing fully who that person was. So of course I don't trust them completely, but I'm going to assume they have an angle. But then at the same time, do I have an angle when I want to prove that I'm always right? Yeah. So that means I'm also projecting that paranoia onto the connection too. So that means that we ain't good for each other at that point. At that point, I'm just putting myself in these predicaments and causing my own karmic lessons. I mean, talk about a slap in the face. Like, oh, I'm doing this to myself. Oh, okay, okay. In summary with that, every victimized mindset topic I've touched on so far sums up to me still having to look at me. Even in predicaments that seem unfair or seem wrong, I still had to look at me. And where is it that I can hold accountability? I've gotten so used to rejection in connections, from groups, from just different types of sceneries where I've been in with people. I got so used to rejection. I wasn't recognizing that I was beginning to act out on traits through a victimized mindset as well that would get people to continue to reject me. This was another thing, because where does that rope end? When do I draw the line with that? When do I recognize that if I'm this used to rejection, I'm then premeditating actionable habits to continue to get people to continue to reject me? And then where do I become conscious of when I'm not being actionable within traits of getting people to reject me, but I'm actually experiencing someone rejecting me out of their own projection towards me? These are questions I had to start asking myself as well, but it took a long time to get there. Once again, another short number of years before reaching that point. Constantly assuming everything was also a test was another thing when I experienced rejection from people. Assuming everything was a test, something had to be learned, something was a lesson, something I had to be also accountable for. Now I'm going to twist the table a little bit. Yes, accountability is important, but also knowing and recognizing when I'm not doing something habitual to create an environment for someone to reject me, but to recognize that someone is applying traits or habits that are being projected onto me to reject me because they feel rejected. And needing to recognize that there's actually not a lesson in that moment of accountability. This is more of a, do you know when it's time to go? Do you know when it's time to leave? And do you know when it's time to remove yourself? That was another big lesson, because then that was the transitional phase of me beginning to work on knowing the differences between a victimized mindset with accountability, and when to recognize that it's time to leave or remove myself or retract and remove my energy when it's not me. But I don't have to make a scene about it. I just need to know it's time to go. I need to know when to lay that boundary for myself and have confidence within myself that I'm going to lay this boundary to know when it's time to remove myself and go. And not be prideful to figure out how to prove my innocence, which is something that I still work on. Not trying to prove my innocence when I recognize that I am not the problem this time. But I can clearly see that there's not justice being taken care of, and so I would go out of my way to try to find my own justice by, oh, let me just go out of my way and report this. Like, there's some things you should report, but the thing is that you got to pick and choose your battles, which is something I was not good at either. But I eventually learned the art of knowing when to retract and when to speak. What is worth your energy and what is worth walking away from. So, I know that this last part is a little bit all over the place, but I think that I'm going to allow it to be all over the place because it's going to allow you to keep an open mind with this specific part of the topic. Because then it's going to hopefully get you to ask questions with yourself where you can retract your energy, or what habits do you need to look at, or are you also reflecting the ideas or actions or habits that relate to maybe you choosing to do things that would cause somebody to reject your presence, not wanting to be around you. Because that's what I had to do. I had to look at myself, man. I had to look at myself, bruh. Whew. Cried so many tears. Oh, man. There were times that I just laid in bed at times. Oh, boy. It was real. Had to do a lot of shadow work. Ritual writing, releasing, and a lot of meditative practice. This was not a one-stop shop journey. This was like, all right, let's pick the next homework assignment on this shelf of assignments. We're not going to do them all at once. Anyways, the point, hopefully, that I'm leaving with this part of the video as well is hopefully you're going to stay motivated the way I stayed motivated. Or at least consider staying motivated, to constantly look for ways to stay motivated, to be self-aware of yourself, and stay motivated to stay self-aware of yourself, because you know you have work to do on yourself.
What was once one turned into three, reconnecting with our family.
So I guess I'll just leave that there. I'll see you in the next video or podcast.
Unifying as three. Let's go ahead and raise the frequency.